There is a small wooden step stool in my garden that I use to reach the higher shelf of my outdoor cabinet where I keep the clay pots in winter. 2 steps up, 2 steps down. Nothing impressive. The kind of thing a person does without thinking. About 3 years ago, I started thinking about it. I would look at those 2 steps and do a quiet calculation before I committed. Is this a good day for this? Are my knees reliable this morning? Is there something nearby to hold if I need it? The step stool hadn't changed. The 2 steps hadn't changed. What had changed was that my body had become something I needed to negotiate with before I asked it to do ordinary things. I didn't like that. I accepted it for longer than I should have, the way you accept things that arrive gradually. Not because you've decided they're acceptable, but because by the time you notice them, they already feel like they've always been there. And then one morning I climbed those 2 steps without thinking about it. Reached for the pot, came back down, turned around to go inside, and only then realized I hadn't done the calculation, hadn't planned it, hadn't assessed anything. My body had just done it, the way it used to. I stood there in the garden for a moment with a clay pot in my hands and thought about what had changed in the months before that morning. And what I kept coming back to was not what I had started doing. It was what I had stopped. 4 things. That is what this is about today. Not a program, not a regimen, not a list of things to add to an already full day. 4 things I stopped doing that I believe, from everything I have observed in this body over more years than I will count out loud, are the reason I stepped off that stool without a second thought on an ordinary Tuesday morning and felt, for a moment, like myself again. The first thing I stopped was eating within an hour of waking up. Quiero decir esto con claridad, porque sé que va en contra de algo que la mayoría de nosotros nos dijeron tantas veces que se volvió una verdad, que el desayuno es la comida más importante del día, que el cuerpo necesita combustible en cuanto se despierta, que saltarse o retrasar la comida matutina es una forma de descuido personal disfrazada de disciplina. Yo creí esto. Me criaron para creerlo y nunca lo cuestioné, porque parecía tener sentido y porque todos a mi alrededor hacían lo mismo. Te levantas, pones la tetera, comes algo en 20 minutos, porque eso es lo que hacen las personas responsables. Lo que noté, no porque lo hubiera leído, no porque un doctor me lo sugiriera, sino porque presté más atención a mi propio cuerpo, con más honestidad de la habitual, fue que los días cuando el desayuno llegaba tarde eran distintos a los días cuando llegaba temprano. No ligeramente distintos, notoriamente distintos. La digestión era más calmada. La pesadez de la mañana, que aceptaba como normal, era menor. The energy in the afternoon, which I had been supplementing with a biscuit and a cup of tea at 3 o'clock for years, held more steadily without the supplement. What I came to understand, in the way Francis understands things, not clinically but practically, is that the body upon waking is finishing something, not ready to begin something. During the night it has been doing the work it cannot do while you're up and moving and asking things of it. Clearing, repairing, organizing. That work doesn't end at 6 in the morning because the alarm went off. It ends when it ends. And if you pour a meal into the system before that work is complete, you interrupt it. The clearing doesn't finish. The digestion starts on top of something that wasn't done yet. And the whole day carries a little of that incompleteness. So I stopped eating immediately upon waking. I drink water first. A full glass, kept on the nightstand the night before, so there is no distance between the decision and the action. Then I make my tea, and I take it to the garden or to the window, and I give the morning its time before I give the body its food. Breakfast comes when something in me actually asks for it, which is rarely before 9:30 and sometimes closer to 10. Within a month of doing this, the post-breakfast bloating that I had called my sensitive digestion for years was mostly gone. The joint stiffness in the mornings, which I talked about in another video, improved in ways I hadn't expected, because I hadn't connected the 2 things. The afternoon energy steadied without the 3 o'clock biscuit. I lost that biscuit without missing it, because the need that it was filling had apparently been created by a breakfast eaten an hour earlier than the body was ready for it. I tell you this not as prescription, but as observation. My body, at this stage of life, needed more time in the morning before it was ready to receive food. Yours may be different. But if you have a morning heaviness, a reliable afternoon slump, a digestion that has never quite done what you wished it would, it might be worth asking whether the timing of breakfast is part of what's happening. The second thing I stopped is the one that required the most from me, because what I stopped was not a food or a habit or a physical practice. It was a mental one. I stopped keeping myself busy in order to avoid being quiet. This took me a long time to see because busyness is so well disguised as virtue. A busy person is a productive person, a useful person, a person who is not sitting around feeling sorry for themselves. I had been busy my whole life, and I wore it the way some people wear a good coat, with quiet pride, as evidence of something about my character. What I eventually understood was that a significant portion of my busyness was not productivity at all. It was avoidance. Tasks I invented or extended or did more thoroughly than necessary in order to keep the mind occupied. Because when the mind was unoccupied, it went to places I had decided, without quite deciding, that I preferred not to visit. The question of whether I was using the time I had in the ways that actually mattered to me. The things I missed. The uncertainty about what the coming years were going to ask of me. The awareness, which sits differently when you are genuinely still, of how much of life is already behind you, and how differently you might have moved through some of it. I wasn't depressed. I want to say that clearly because I think it matters. I was a person who had made busyness into a system for managing feelings that I hadn't gotten around to actually feeling, and the system had costs that I hadn't totaled up. The physical costs, which are the ones I can speak to most directly. The body of a person in a constant mild state of avoidance is a body in a constant mild state of stress. Not dramatic stress, just the low hum of a system that is never fully at rest. The shoulders that never quite relax, the sleep that is long enough and not deep enough. The tiredness that doesn't resolve with rest because it isn't tiredness from effort. It's tiredness from the ongoing low-level work of keeping certain thoughts at bay. What I changed was simple and was also, for the first several weeks, genuinely uncomfortable. I began sitting without purpose. Not meditation. I have tried meditation in the formal sense, and I am not built for it, which I have accepted without apology. Just sitting, with my tea in my chair by the window, with no book and no television, and no phone and no task waiting. 10 minutes, where the only agreement I made with myself was to stay there and not fill it. The first few days, the mind went immediately to everything I had been keeping it away from. I let it go there. I stayed with what it found. And what I discovered, not after months, within the first 2 weeks, is that the things I had been avoiding were considerably less frightening when I faced them directly than they had been when I was sensing them at the edge of everything and arranging my days to keep them at that edge. The shoulders relaxed. Not quickly, over months. The sleep changed in the same way that sleep changes when something that was quietly working against it has been removed. My blood pressure, which had been slightly elevated for years and which my doctor had mentioned without urgency, normalized. He noticed at my next check. He adjusted the medication. I did not tell him that I had started spending 10 minutes a day sitting in a chair doing nothing because I was fairly certain that was not the explanation he was looking for. Pero sé que cambió, y sé cuándo cambió, y el momento no fue una coincidencia. Ocupado no es lo mismo que estar bien. Los confundí durante mucho tiempo, no son iguales. La tercera cosa que dejé fue comer cualquier cosa que viniera en un empaque. Necesito tener cuidado con cómo digo esto, porque no estoy describiendo una transformación alimenticia drástica, ni la eliminación de algo que la mayoría de la gente consideraría indulgente. No estaba comiendo mal según una evaluación externa razonable. Estaba comiendo lo que el supermercado llama saludable: galletas etiquetadas como integrales, cereales etiquetados como altos en fibra, yogures con fruta ya mezclada, sopas en cartones con bajo contenido de sodio impreso en el frente. Las cosas que una persona compra cuando está intentando tomar buenas decisiones y confía en que la etiqueta es una guía confiable de lo que hay dentro. What I noticed, and again this was observation of my own body rather than anything I read, was a persistent digestive discomfort that I had attributed for years to age-related digestive slowing. The bloating after lunch, the inconsistency, the days when my stomach felt like it was working against me for no reason I could identify. I had brought it up with my doctor, who said it was common, which I understood to mean it was normal, which I understood to mean it was something to manage rather than something to address. Then for 2 weeks, for reasons that had nothing to do with health, I was waiting on a grocery delivery that came late and improvised with what I had in the house. I ate almost nothing from a package: eggs, oats I cooked myself, vegetables, fruit, yogurt with nothing mixed in, to which I added honey from a jar. Bread I made once because I had time and the inclination. By the end of those 2 weeks, the digestive discomfort was almost entirely gone. I brought the packaged foods back one at a time after that, the way you reintroduce things when you're trying to find what the problem was. The whole grain crackers came back first. The bloating came with them, within 2 days, reliably enough that there was no question about the connection. The low-sodium carton soups came back next. Same result. The fruit yogurts, the ones I had thought of as a healthy choice for years, were the worst of all, because the sweeteners used to preserve the fruit at the bottom of the container did something to my digestion that took several days to calm down after I stopped again. What I eat now doesn't have a label. An egg doesn't have an ingredient list. An apple doesn't have a nutrition panel. A bowl of oats with a spoonful of honey requires no investigation. I am not a different person in the kitchen. I cook simply and always have. But I cook with things rather than products, and my body, at this stage of life, has responded to that distinction in ways that 3 years of low-sodium labels never managed to produce. I am not telling you that packaged food is poison. I am telling you that my body, specifically, at this specific stage of life, does better without it. Yours may differ, but if you have a digestive complaint you've been calling age-related and living with rather than investigating, it might be worth 2 weeks of eating only things that don't have ingredients printed on the side of them, just to see what your body says when you remove the variable. The fourth thing I stopped is the one that I think matters most, and it is also the one that is most difficult to admit, because it requires confessing to a way of thinking about my own body that I am not proud of. I stopped accepting pain as inevitable, without investigating whether it was. For years, I had 2 categories for physical discomfort. La primera categoría eran cosas que requerían atención médica, cosas súbitas, cosas nuevas, cosas con características que sugerían que algo serio estaba ocurriendo. Para esas cosas, fui al doctor. La segunda categoría era todo lo demás, que archivé bajo el mismo encabezado general: el costo de tener la edad que tengo, la rodilla que me llevaba hablando años, el hombro que nunca terminaba de completar su rango completo de movimiento, la parte baja de la espalda en ciertas mañanas, la irregularidad intestinal que mencioné antes, que ahora sé que no era la edad la que la causaba, sino las galletas. Esa segunda categoría creció silenciosamente con el tiempo, no porque los problemas crecieran dramáticamente, sino porque cada nueva limitación se medía contra lo que ya aceptaba como normal, y si parecía comparable en escala, iba a la misma carpeta. Esa carpeta se fue llenando. Yo me fui achicando, en formas que no había notado, porque estaba midiendo mal. The moment that changed this. I mentioned the shoulder to my doctor, not because it had gotten worse, It hadn't. But because it came up naturally in conversation during a visit about something else, and I said, almost as an aside, that my shoulder had been limiting for a few years, and I assumed it was just one of those things. He examined it for 4 minutes. He told me there was a specific impingement that was very treatable, not with surgery, not with ongoing medication, with a series of targeted exercises that would take 6 weeks and could be done at home. He wrote them down. I did them. In 6 weeks, I could reach the upper shelf of my kitchen cabinet without planning the movement. I had been planning that movement for 3 years. I sat in my car after that appointment, and I was angry in the particular way you are angry when the person you're angry at is yourself. 3 years of limitation that I had called inevitable. 3 years of adapting my kitchen, my gardening, my daily movements to accommodate a shoulder that could have been largely restored in 6 weeks with a piece of paper and some floor space. 3 years of the file getting fuller while I kept measuring against what I'd already accepted. What I do now is different. When something persists for more than 2 weeks, I write it down. When something that has been consistent changes its pattern, I pay attention. I bring things to appointments that I would previously have edited out because they seemed too small or too obviously age-related to mention. I have stopped using age as the final answer before I've asked the question. I want to say clearly what this is not. It is not hypochondria. It is not alarm at every sensation or constant vigilance for things to worry about. Es la curiosidad, llevada a un cuerpo en el que he estado viviendo el tiempo suficiente como para conocerlo razonablemente, aplicada con la misma atención que le pondría a cualquier otra cosa en mi vida que no estuviera funcionando del todo bien. La diferencia entre ser un paciente de mi propia salud y ser un participante en ella. El hombro fue lo primero que investigué de esa manera, pero no fue lo último. Algunas de las cosas que llevé a mi médico después tenían explicaciones simples y soluciones simples. Algunas no tenían solución, pero saberlo seguía siendo útil, porque me permitía dejar de gastar energía en manejar algo que no entendía y empezar a gastarla en adaptarme inteligentemente a algo que sí. Y algunas cosas resultaron estar conectadas con las otras 3 que les mencioné hoy: la comida, la quietud, el tiempo de las comidas, de formas que significaba que al abordar estos puntos se aliviaban los síntomas que pensaba mencionar en la siguiente cita. It doesn't separate its complaints into the categories we use for them. What you eat affects your joints. What you think about affects your blood pressure. When you eat affects your digestion, which affects your energy, which affects your sleep, which affects the shoulders and the mood and the resilience of the immune system. None of these things is entirely separate from any other, and the woman who sits down in her garden chair without calculating whether it's safe to do so is a woman whose system, in its interconnected entirety, has found a better equilibrium than the one she was living in 3 years ago. I didn't get there by adding things. I got there by removing 4 habits that had been quietly working against me for years, each of them disguised as something reasonable. Responsible eating, productive use of time, careful management of what seemed like inevitable decline. None of them were what they seemed. None of them were inevitable. 2 steps up, 2 steps down. I use it several times a week without thinking about it. That is the whole story, really. Not that I became someone different or younger or more capable in any dramatic sense. Just that I stopped making it harder than it needed to be. That turned out to be enough.